Forgotten crimes that shook the world. They told you these crimes were solved, but the truth? Most of the world forgot them. What really happened will shock you. Have you ever heard of crimes so twisted, so shocking, that even history seems to have tried to forget them? Crimes that changed lives, towns, and even countries, but somehow slipped under the radar of most history books. Today, we're diving into some of the most chilling, forgotten crimes that shook the world. Crimes that will make you question how well we really know our past, and how easily some horrors can fade into obscurity. By the end of this video, you'll know stories so bizarre, so shocking, that they feel like they belong in a dark thriller. But they're all real. The world is full of crime, but some crimes leave a mark so deep that even decades later, historians struggle to piece together the full story. We're talking about murders, heists, betrayals, conspiracies, and injustices so horrifying that they could be movies on their own. Yet, for some reason, they don't make it into mainstream history. Maybe the details were too shocking. Maybe the people involved were too powerful. Or maybe society just didn't want to remember. Today, we're going to uncover these forgotten stories, layer by layer. And you'll see why some crimes are remembered and others are almost erased from memory. One such story begins in the early 20th century in a sleepy European town. The town appeared peaceful, a place where everyone knew everyone else. But beneath the calm, something dark was brewing. A series of murders went unnoticed for years, not because there weren't witnesses, but because the authorities dismissed the signs, chalking them up to accidents or coincidences. The victims were ordinary people, neighbors, even friends of the locals. It wasn't until the body of a young woman was found under mysterious circumstances that anyone started paying attention. The investigation revealed a string of crimes spanning nearly a decade. Crimes so cunningly covered up that the perpetrator had almost gotten away with them all. This was a story that, had it been widely known, would have shocked Europe. But somehow, over time, it faded into obscurity, remembered only in small historical records and whispers. Fast forward to another continent, to a bustling city in the United States during the 1970s. Crime in the city was nothing new, but what happened here was different. A group of individuals orchestrated a heist, unlike anything law enforcement had seen before. They planned every detail, studied every security loophole, and executed the crime with surgical precision. Millions were stolen, and yet strangely, the case never got the media attention it deserved. The culprits were eventually caught, but the public barely knew their names. What's more chilling is how the investigation revealed corruption at multiple levels, showing how a system designed to protect people could fail them entirely. This case is a prime example of how some crimes, though monumental, remain forgotten, overshadowed by other headlines, politics, or public disinterest. But it's not just about theft or murder. Some forgotten crimes involve betrayal at the highest levels. Crimes that shook governments, kingdoms, and nations. There were plots so audacious, conspiracies so intricate, that they could have toppled empires. But history almost erased them. One such plot involved a trusted official. Someone everyone believed was loyal to their nation. Behind closed doors, however, they were orchestrating a plan to destabilize the government for personal gain, manipulating people and circumstances with terrifying precision. When the plot was uncovered, it created chaos, paranoia, and fear. Yet today, most people have never heard of it. The story challenges us to think about trust, loyalty, and how power can corrupt even the most seemingly honorable people. And there are crimes so bizarre, so strange, that you'd think they belonged in fiction rather than reality. Take, for instance, a small town where a series of mysterious disappearances occurred over several months. People vanished without a trace, leaving families desperate, police baffled, and neighbors fearful. What makes this case unforgettable is not just the crime itself, but the patterns, the clues, and the eerie coincidences that seemed almost supernatural. When investigators finally pieced together what happened, the truth was more shocking than anyone could imagine. Yet, because it didn't involve high-profile victims or political intrigue, it slipped into the shadows of history, barely remembered by anyone outside the local area. These stories raise important questions. How do some crimes become infamous, while others are forgotten? Is it luck, timing, media attention, or something deeper about society's memory? When we uncover these forgotten crimes, we not only reveal human cruelty, cunning, and error, but we also shine a light on lessons we've ignored. The people who suffered, the communities affected, and even the perpetrators, all of them left marks on the world, whether we remember them or not. Understanding these forgotten crimes gives us perspective on our own time, our own society, and how easily some truths can be buried. By exploring these stories in depth, we can see patterns, connections, and sometimes even warnings for today. The forgotten crimes of the past are rarely just stories. They are lessons, puzzles, and sometimes eerie predictions. As we go deeper, you'll encounter tales of betrayal, meticulous planning, chilling murders, unexplained disappearances, and audacious cons. Each story is a piece of a larger mosaic of human behavior and societal oversight. The more we examine, the more we realize that what is forgotten isn't always gone. Sometimes it's just waiting for someone to uncover it. Folks, and that's exactly what we're going to do over the next few hours. We'll travel across continents and centuries, peeling back the layers of crime and mystery. We'll meet ordinary people caught in extraordinary circumstances, criminals whose cunning was matched only by their audacity, and societies that either turned a blind eye or failed to act in time. These are the forgotten crimes that shook the world, and they demand to be remembered. So get ready, because as we dive deeper, the stories will get darker, the twists more shocking, and the truths more unsettling. By the end of this video, you'll see history in a new light, understanding that the world we know today was shaped not just by wars and politics, but also by crimes that were almost forgotten, and yet left indelible marks on humanity. And if you think this is just a collection of old stories, wait until we explore the crimes that influenced modern law, societal change, and even psychology. You'll be amazed at how events from decades or centuries ago continue to affect the world today. So stay tuned, because the next story will make you question everything you thought you knew about justice, morality, and human nature. As we continue, our next story takes us to a quiet village in England during the early 1900s. The village seemed like any other: cobblestone streets, small cottages, and people who had lived there for generations. But behind the calm exterior, a secret was festering. Families began noticing small, strange disappearances. Tools missing, livestock found dead, and later, people vanishing without a trace. At first, locals dismissed it as superstition or the work of mischievous youths. But the incidents escalated. Soon, the authorities were involved, only to find the evidence almost deliberately erased. Investigators discovered a web of deceit involving some of the town's most respected figures. The crime wasn't about money or greed. It was about power, control, and a terrifying need to manipulate those around them. The details of this crime shocked even experienced detectives. Yet over time, it faded into the corners of forgotten history, remembered only in dusty police reports and whispers among the descendants of those involved. Moving across the Atlantic, we find ourselves in Chicago in the 1920s. The city was in the midst of Prohibition, a time notorious for gang violence, bootlegging, and corruption. But among the many crimes, one case stood out, though it barely made headlines. A network of criminals exploited the chaos of the city, targeting not only banks, but also ordinary citizens. What made this crime different was the sophistication of the operation. The criminals weren't just reckless. They studied the system, manipulated officials, and left the city in a state of fear. Entire neighborhoods were affected, yet the media barely covered it because larger, more sensationalized gang wars were dominating the news. The case, once solved, revealed shocking connections between crime bosses, corrupt law enforcement, and even politicians. Today, it is mostly forgotten, but it illustrates how systemic corruption can allow crimes to grow unnoticed until they explode into tragedy. Our next tale takes us to South America, where a small town in Brazil became the site of a mysterious and horrifying series of events. A wealthy landowner disappeared, leaving behind a family terrified and confused. Initially, authorities believed he had fled due to debt, but evidence soon suggested foul play. Investigators uncovered a chilling story of betrayal, jealousy, and calculated murder. What made this case even more remarkable was the cunning of the perpetrator, who used the town's own gossip and social hierarchy against them. For years, the truth remained hidden, and even after the criminal was caught, most people outside the town never learned about the crime. This story is a stark reminder of how some acts of evil can go unnoticed when society fails to recognize subtle warning signs. In Asia, during the mid-20th century, a crime unfolded in a bustling metropolitan area that could have easily been the plot of a thriller novel. An influential business figure was discovered dead under circumstances that baffled investigators. No forced entry, no obvious motives, yet the clues pointed to a meticulous plan orchestrated by someone with intimate knowledge of the victim's life. The investigation revealed a network of manipulation, blackmail, and financial fraud spanning multiple countries. What's terrifying about this crime is not just the act itself, but how carefully the perpetrator covered their tracks, almost erasing their presence entirely. Today, this case is rarely discussed outside of specialized historical texts, yet it demonstrates the lengths some people will go to achieve wealth and power, and how easy it can be for society to overlook crimes that don't fit the dramatic headlines. And then there are crimes so surreal, so almost unbelievable, that they leave you questioning reality. In the 1960s, a small European city experienced a series of crimes that appeared random at first. Break-ins, thefts, and minor assaults. But slowly, a pattern emerged. The perpetrator seemed to have a psychological fascination with chaos, leaving cryptic notes, puzzles, and even staged scenes that confused authorities and terrified citizens. The investigation uncovered a mind so twisted, yet intelligent, that law enforcement struggled to anticipate the next move. Eventually, the criminal was caught, but the case was buried under other global events at the time, leaving it almost forgotten. What makes this crime unforgettable isn't just the actions themselves, but the insight they provide into human psychology, obsession, and how curiosity can sometimes save or endanger lives. Even more chilling are crimes that involve multiple layers of deception and manipulation over decades. Consider a case from Eastern Europe, where a family disappeared without explanation. Years later, documents surfaced, revealing that the family had been victims of a meticulously planned scheme involving neighbors, local officials, and international connections. The crime was motivated by greed, inheritance disputes, and a desire to cover up past sins. Yet the truth only emerged decades later through painstaking research. Today, historians regard the case as one of the most complex and fascinating unsolved crimes of the century. A story that shows how time can both conceal and reveal the darkest aspects of human nature. Through all these stories, one thing becomes clear. Crime isn't just about acts of violence or theft. Some of the most shocking events are those hidden in plain sight, overlooked by society, ignored by the media, or buried by powerful interests. forgotten crimes teach us lessons about vigilance, justice, and human behavior. They remind us that evil often thrives not in chaos, but in subtlety, in manipulation, and in the small cracks of society that we fail to notice. As we continue this journey, you'll encounter more cases and remember, each story is more than just a tale of wrongdoing. It's a window into human nature, a reflection of society, and a cautionary tale for us all. As we move forward, keep your mind open, your curiosity sharp, and prepare to see the world of crime through a lens you've never considered before. These forgotten crimes are waiting to be remembered, and by the end of this video, you'll know them better than most historians do. Next, we move to a quiet town in the American Midwest during the 1930s. The Great Depression had left the nation struggling, and many communities were desperate, hungry, and fearful. In this seemingly ordinary town, a series of bizarre crimes began to surface. At first, they seemed minor: petty thefts, vandalism, and small disputes among neighbors. But soon, the crimes escalated. Families reported unusual behavior from neighbors, strange disappearances, and unsettling encounters late at night. When authorities investigated, they uncovered a horrifying reality. A local group had been orchestrating a hidden network of criminal activity, including extortion, intimidation, and murder, all designed to control the town for personal gain. What made this crime especially shocking was the level of planning and deception. The criminals were not outsiders. They were respected members of the community, people everyone trusted, and yet, for years, they had been exploiting their neighbors in ways that went completely unnoticed. Meanwhile, on the other side of the world, in Japan during the 1940s, the chaos of war created the perfect environment for crimes that almost no one remembers today. Amid the turmoil, a prominent merchant was found dead under mysterious circumstances. Official records claimed it was an accident, but hidden journals, letters, and eyewitness accounts revealed a chilling truth. The death had been orchestrated by rivals seeking control over lucrative wartime contracts. The investigation was stifled by bureaucracy and the chaos of war, and the perpetrators escaped justice. This case is a stark reminder that some of the most impactful crimes don't make headlines because history has bigger events to focus on. And yet, the ripple effects of these forgotten crimes shaped local economies, family fortunes, and social dynamics for decades. In a coastal town in Italy during the 1950s, another extraordinary crime unfolded. A fisherman disappeared, leaving behind a small family and an empty home. At first, authorities thought he had drowned at sea, a common enough tragedy in a fishing town. But when the family's neighbors began reporting suspicious sightings and strange behaviors from certain town officials, the truth began to emerge. It turned out that a clandestine smuggling operation had used the fishermen as a scapegoat to cover their illicit activities. The investigation, hindered by corruption and fear, revealed an organized crime network that had existed quietly for years, manipulating law enforcement and townspeople alike. This story illustrates how ordinary lives can be dramatically affected by crimes that remain hidden until long after the damage is done. Now, let's shift to a crime that is more psychological than physical, but no less horrifying. In a European capital during the 1960s, a series of crimes involved subtle manipulation, coercion, and exploitation of vulnerable individuals. The perpetrators were cunning, preying on fear, loneliness, and social anxiety. Unlike typical crimes, there were few witnesses, and the evidence was minimal. Yet, the psychological impact on the victims and their families was profound, leaving scars that lasted a lifetime. Investigators later realized the crime spanned years, with the perpetrators carefully choosing victims and manipulating those around them to prevent detection. Today, this case is barely discussed, but it highlights the importance of understanding psychological abuse as a form of crime, a type that can devastate communities silently, without public outrage or media coverage. One of the most chilling, forgotten crimes comes from a remote region in Africa during the late 1970s. A series of disappearances among miners and laborers initially seemed coincidental. But when patterns emerged, investigators discovered a horrific scheme. A powerful local figure had orchestrated forced disappearances to consolidate control over valuable mining resources. The crimes involved deceit, threats, and in some cases, direct violence. Families lived in fear, unsure whether reporting the crimes would lead to justice or retaliation. This case remained largely unknown internationally because it occurred in a remote area and involved victims who were often marginalized. Yet it remains a haunting example of how power, greed, and violence can intersect to create forgotten tragedies that shape communities for generations. Even in modern times, crimes slip into obscurity despite their magnitude. In the 1990s, in a European city recovering from political upheaval, a financial fraud scandal emerged that involved millions of dollars and implicated high-ranking officials. The case was documented, investigated, and even partially prosecuted, yet very few people remember it today. The perpetrators exploited systemic weaknesses, hiding behind legal loopholes and ensuring that most victims had no way to recover their losses. This forgotten crime demonstrates that even in societies with strong institutions, cunning individuals can manipulate the system, committing crimes that are devastating, yet quietly buried under bureaucracy and public forgetfulness. Across these stories, a pattern emerges. Many forgotten crimes are not only about the acts themselves, but about the context in which they occur: chaos, war, economic hardship, or social marginalization. These circumstances allow criminals to act undetected, authorities to overlook warning signs, and communities to remain unaware until the damage is done. Forgotten crimes teach us not only about human cruelty, but also about societal blind spots, systemic failures, and the importance of vigilance. As we continue, you'll encounter even more shocking cases where ordinary life collided with extraordinary evil. We'll see how ambition, jealousy, and desperation drove people to commit crimes that should have made headlines. The stories we uncover are not just tales of wrongdoing, they're lessons. They remind us that evil often thrives in the shadows, that silence can empower criminals, and that the line between safety and danger is often thinner than we realize. By exploring these forgotten crimes, we gain insight into human nature, societal dynamics, and the often overlooked forces that shape our history. And as the next chapters unfold, prepare to meet criminals whose audacity knows no bounds, victims whose suffering was ignored, and communities forever changed by events that history almost forgot. You'll see patterns that transcend time and geography, showing that while society changes, the human capacity for both deception and resilience remains constant. These forgotten crimes, though hidden, are not insignificant. They echo across generations, teaching us lessons that remain relevant today. Now let's travel to a bustling city in France during the 1920s. The city was alive with art, culture, and a sense of post-war freedom. But beneath the glamorous streets, a dark crime unfolded. A young woman disappeared one evening after leaving her workplace. Initially, the disappearance was dismissed as a case of someone running away. But evidence soon suggested foul play. Over the following months, investigators uncovered a string of similar disappearances, all connected by subtle clues that went unnoticed by the public. What made this case terrifying was the audacity of the perpetrator, a figure who moved freely among society's elite, using charm and social influence to cover tracks. The investigation revealed corruption in local law enforcement and high society, showing how even in seemingly civilized settings, crime can flourish in secrecy. Today, the case is barely mentioned in French criminal history, yet it remains a chilling example of how power, wealth, and social status can conceal horrific acts. Meanwhile, in North America, during the 1940s, a notorious heist took place that few remember today. Unlike typical bank robberies, this crime was meticulously planned, involving multiple accomplices, disguises, and diversion tactics that outsmarted law enforcement. For weeks, millions of dollars were stolen, yet the story quickly faded from headlines as the world was consumed by the war effort. What's shocking is how the investigation eventually uncovered a network of insider corruption. People within the bank, law enforcement, and even local government were complicit. The case illustrates that sometimes the biggest crimes are not just about force or opportunity. They're about exploiting the systems people trust most. Despite its significance, this heist is virtually forgotten outside specialized crime history circles. In South America, a remote village in Argentina became the scene of a crime so bizarre it seems almost fictional. A series of mysterious fires destroyed properties in ways that initially suggested accidents, but investigators noticed patterns, timing, locations, and targets. As the investigation deepened, it became clear that a single individual had orchestrated the arson as a cover for theft and personal vendettas. What made the crime remarkable was the precision and planning involved, as well as the perpetrator's ability to manipulate the community into suspecting one another. When caught, the individual confessed, revealing a story of greed, obsession, and the lengths someone would go to satisfy personal desires. Yet the case never gained international attention, leaving it largely forgotten outside the local region. In Asia, during the 1950s, a political scandal turned deadly when an influential official was discovered to be behind a series of violent acts aimed at consolidating power. At first, these acts were considered accidents or random attacks, but over time, investigators pieced together evidence showing a deliberate and systematic campaign. What is particularly chilling is how the crimes were enabled by silence and fear. Citizens were too intimidated to report wrongdoing, and colleagues too cautious to expose the perpetrator. The crimes had lasting impacts on local governance, political stability, and public trust, yet very few outside the country are aware of these events today. This story is a stark reminder that power, unchecked, can foster criminal behavior that reshapes society in hidden ways. Some forgotten crimes are psychological rather than physical, leaving deep emotional scars. In a European city during the 1970s, a series of manipulations and threats targeted vulnerable members of the community. The perpetrators' methods were subtle but devastating: gaslighting, coercion, and exploiting personal secrets to control victims. Authorities struggled to intervene because evidence was scarce, and victims often felt trapped and isolated. The impact of these crimes extended far beyond the individuals involved, creating a climate of fear and distrust. Today, these cases are rarely discussed, but they reveal the profound effects of psychological manipulation as a form of crime, and remind us that harm isn't always visible. In Africa, a small town experienced a chilling crime during the late 1980s that exposed the intersection of greed and power. A local business owner disappeared, and initial reports suggested he had simply left town. However, evidence later revealed an organized plot to seize his assets, involving complicity from community leaders and family members. The investigation was slow and difficult, hindered by intimidation and lack of resources. The crime had devastating consequences for the town, creating mistrust and altering social dynamics for years. Today, it is rarely mentioned outside local records, but it demonstrates how communities can be shaped by hidden acts of criminality and deception. Even in modern Europe, crimes sometimes slip through the cracks. In the 1990s, a cyber fraud scheme affected thousands of people across multiple countries. The perpetrators used advanced technology, exploiting vulnerabilities that few authorities fully understood at the time. While some individuals were eventually caught, most victims never recovered their losses, and the case faded from public memory. This story is important because it shows that crime evolves with society, and even sophisticated systems can be manipulated in ways that go unnoticed until it's too late. The forgotten nature of the crime doesn't make it any less significant. It highlights how quickly public attention can shift and how easily systemic gaps can be exploited. Across these stories, a common thread emerges. Many forgotten crimes involve ordinary lives, disrupted by extraordinary acts of human deception, greed, or cruelty. Whether through murder, theft, manipulation, or conspiracy, the impact of these crimes extends far beyond immediate victims, shaping communities, societies, and even laws. By studying forgotten crimes, we uncover patterns of human behavior, societal weaknesses, and the lessons that history almost erased. As we proceed further, we prepare to encounter more incredible cases from around the world. We will explore serial crimes that went unnoticed for years, elaborate cons that fooled entire governments, and incidents of betrayal so shocking they changed the course of history. Each story adds depth to our understanding of human nature, crime, and the thin line between order and chaos. By the end of this video, you'll realize that what is forgotten is not insignificant. Forgotten crimes are mirrors reflecting human ambition, cruelty, and resilience. They remind us that evil can thrive in silence, and that vigilance, awareness, and history are our best tools against repeating past mistakes. Stay with us, because the next stories will reveal crimes even darker, more cunning, and more unbelievable than the ones we've already uncovered. Now, we move to a case that chilled an entire city, yet remains largely unknown today. In the late 1960s, in a metropolitan area of the United States, a series of brutal murders targeted young women living alone. The killer was meticulous, leaving almost no clues behind, striking fear into the community. Residents locked their doors, avoided walking alone at night, and whispered about the disappearances. Yet authorities struggled to connect the cases. What made this crime particularly chilling was the psychological profile of the perpetrator. Someone who seemed normal in public, blending into society while committing horrific acts in secret. Over time, the murders stopped as suddenly as they began, leaving the city haunted by questions that remain unsolved to this day. Few outside true crime circles have heard of this case, yet it exemplifies how fear, secrecy, and cunning can allow evil to operate unnoticed. Across the Atlantic, in a European country during the 1970s, a political conspiracy unfolded that could have toppled governments. A high-ranking official orchestrated a series of covert operations aimed at discrediting rivals, covering up scandals, and consolidating power. What made the scheme astonishing was its sophistication, manipulation of media, secret surveillance, and bribery ensured the plots remained hidden from public scrutiny. Investigators later pieced together the truth, revealing a tangled web of deception that affected not just politicians, but ordinary citizens caught in bureaucratic and social crossfire. Despite the gravity of the crimes, most people today are unaware of this conspiracy, highlighting how political crimes can remain forgotten while shaping the course of history behind the scenes. In South America, during the 1980s, a serial fraud operation targeted small towns and rural communities. The perpetrators posed as government officials, exploiting the trust of citizens to embezzle funds, seize land, and manipulate local elections. The crimes were methodical, often involving intimidation and psychological coercion to prevent victims from speaking out. Even when authorities investigated, evidence was scarce, and the criminals often used official channels to cover their tracks. The result was widespread mistrust and long-term social consequences. Today, the case is barely mentioned outside local archives, yet it stands as one of the most audacious and impactful schemes in modern history. Meanwhile, in a quiet city in Asia during the 1990s, a chilling case of serial manipulation and coercion unfolded over several years. The perpetrator targeted vulnerable individuals using psychological tactics to exploit their fears, relationships, and personal secrets. Families reported loved ones disappearing or changing drastically with little explanation. Investigators slowly unraveled a web of abuse, manipulation, and silent threats that had affected dozens of lives. What makes this crime remarkable is that it was not physical, but emotional and social, demonstrating that the most damaging crimes aren't always violent or overt. Today, this case remains largely forgotten, yet its lessons about human vulnerability and manipulation are timeless. Some forgotten crimes involve entire communities being complicit or manipulated. In a small town in Eastern Europe during the 1970s, a series of disappearances affected dozens of people. Investigators eventually discovered a clandestine network of individuals who exploited fear, superstition, and social pressures to carry out their crimes. The perpetrators were clever, using local folklore and rumors to cover their actions and prevent suspicion. Families were terrified to speak out, and even when crimes were exposed, the network's influence ensured that justice was limited. Today, this crime is almost entirely unknown outside specialized historical studies, yet it serves as a chilling example of how collective silence can enable evil to flourish. In the United States during the 1980s, an organized criminal syndicate carried out a string of heists that defied logic and law enforcement strategies. Each theft was more audacious than the last, involving disguises, technological expertise, and psychological tactics to outsmart authorities. What is particularly striking is how the criminals exploited legal loopholes, insider information, and misdirection to remain free for years. Eventually, some were caught, but the full scale of the crimes and the ingenuity involved remains largely forgotten by the public. This case is a reminder that intelligence, planning, and boldness can make some of the most significant crimes invisible to mainstream memory. Some of the darkest, forgotten crimes come from decades-long patterns of abuse and exploitation. In a European capital, a high-ranking industrialist maintained a network of coerced laborers, exploiting them under the guise of legitimate work for years. Investigators eventually uncovered the scope, revealing systematic abuse, bribery, and threats that prevented workers from escaping or reporting crimes. The societal and legal systems enabled the crimes to continue far longer than they should have. Although it made some headlines at the time, today it is largely unknown outside specialist studies. Yet it remains a haunting example of how power, secrecy, and social complicity can enable crimes to persist unnoticed for decades. Even the most audacious serial crimes often leave traces in unexpected ways. Across continents, patterns emerge, perpetrators exploiting societal blind spots, victims marginalized by circumstance, and authorities overwhelmed or misled. Forgotten crimes teach us about vigilance, human nature, and systemic weakness. They show that evil often operates quietly, under the radar, and that history itself can be selective in what it chooses to remember. As we continue, the next stories will take us into crimes involving betrayal, greed, and manipulation at the highest levels. Crimes that altered economies, governments, and societies, yet were almost erased from public memory. These are stories where ordinary people intersected with extraordinary evil, and where consequences echo far beyond the immediate victims. Each case is a lesson, a cautionary tale, and a glimpse into the darker corners of human ambition and cruelty. By the end of this video, you'll see that forgotten crimes are not merely stories of the past. They are mirrors reflecting the vulnerabilities, choices, and moral complexities of human society. The next chapters will reveal even more audacious plots, shocking betrayals, and crimes that demand to be remembered because their impact is far greater than most realize. Some of the most fascinating forgotten crimes are not individual acts of violence or theft, but elaborate conspiracies that spanned years, even decades, and involved entire networks of people. In 18th century Europe, for example, a plot unfolded that could have changed the course of a nation. High-ranking officials, merchants, and even members of the royal court were involved in secret schemes designed to manipulate the succession of power. The conspirators used letters, secret meetings, and coded messages to coordinate their plans, making it extremely difficult for anyone outside the inner circle to uncover the truth. Eventually, the conspiracy was partially exposed, but many of the key players escaped justice. Today, the story is almost unknown, overshadowed by more famous historical events. Yet it reveals how greed, ambition, and betrayal can operate at the very heart of society. Meanwhile, in the early 20th century, a wealthy family in South America became the center of a shocking criminal saga. The patriarch had amassed significant wealth through legal and illegal means, but his obsession with control extended to the point of orchestrating disappearances, manipulating inheritances, and silencing dissent within his own household. Investigators eventually uncovered letters, financial records, and witness accounts that revealed a chilling pattern of calculated cruelty. The crimes affected not only family members, but also entire communities, as the patriarch's influence reached far beyond his estate. Today, these events are mostly forgotten outside local historical accounts, yet they serve as a striking example of how unchecked power within a family or community can lead to devastating crimes. In another case, during the mid-1900s, an international fraud network operated across Europe, North America, and Asia. Much of the stolen wealth had already disappeared, and many perpetrators remained at large. Some crimes are forgotten because they occurred during times of global chaos. In the aftermath of World War II, for instance, certain individuals and groups took advantage of political instability to commit atrocities and exploit vulnerable populations. Smuggling, theft, and violence were rampant. Yet many cases went undocumented or were intentionally covered up. In some instances, perpetrators were shielded by new governments or societal priorities, ensuring that the crimes were almost entirely erased from memory. The impact on victims and communities, however, lasted for generations, illustrating that forgotten crimes are often not forgotten by those who lived through them. In Asia, during the late 20th century, a criminal conspiracy involved high-ranking officials, corporate executives, and organized crime figures. The scheme centered on monopolizing critical resources and eliminating competitors through intimidation, fraud, and even murder. Investigators discovered extensive evidence, including coded communications and financial records, but the full scope of the operation was never made public. Many of the perpetrators continued their activities with minimal consequences. Today, few people are aware of this crime, yet its effects have shaped industries, economies, and political relationships for years afterward. Even seemingly minor betrayals can escalate into forgotten crimes with major consequences. In a small European town during the 19th century, a local councilman abused his position to orchestrate land grabs, displace families, and silence opponents. What made the crime particularly disturbing was its long-term effect. Entire neighborhoods were reshaped, local economies disrupted, and the social fabric altered. The councilman faced limited consequences, and most historical accounts barely mention the events. Yet the story serves as a cautionary tale of how small abuses of power can escalate into significant crimes that are quietly woven into history. Across these stories, a pattern emerges. Many forgotten crimes involve planning, secrecy, and social or political influence. They remind us that evil does not always announce itself with violence. It can operate subtly, quietly, and over long periods, leaving profound consequences for generations. They also show how memory itself is selective. Some crimes are remembered because they fit narratives or involve sensational elements, while others, often more complex or systemic, have died centuries long before, are quietly erased. And the world is full of such cases. In Africa during the 1980s, a criminal syndicate manipulated trade routes, bribed officials, and used violence to monopolize resources. Entire villages suffered, yet international media barely reported on the situation because it didn't fit the larger geopolitical narratives of the time. In North America, during the 1970s, organized crime infiltrated construction, shipping, and entertainment industries, committing fraud and extortion on a massive scale. Investigators eventually uncovered portions of these operations, but the full extent remains largely unknown. Even in modern times, forgotten crimes continue to surface. Cybercrime, international fraud, and covert operations now allow criminals to exploit technology and global systems, often remaining hidden for years. The scale of these crimes can be staggering, affecting millions of people while staying largely invisible to the public. Forgotten crimes, whether historical or contemporary, remind us that vigilance is essential and that justice is often delayed, incomplete, or selective. As we continue, you'll see even more cases where greed, betrayal, and deception intersect with power and opportunity. We'll explore crimes that altered governments, changed economies, and devastated communities, yet are almost absent from mainstream history. These stories are more than shocking. They are lessons, reflections of human ambition, and warnings for the present day. By the end of this video, you'll understand that forgotten crimes are not trivial. They are key pieces of our collective history. They reveal human nature in its darkest forms, expose systemic weaknesses, and remind us that while history may forget, the consequences often remain. And as we delve deeper, the next stories will challenge your understanding of morality, justice, and the hidden forces that shape our world. Some of the most haunting forgotten crimes are those that remain unsolved, cases where the truth is elusive, the perpetrators unknown, and the victims' fates shrouded in mystery. In a coastal city in northern Europe during the 1920s, a series of disappearances baffled authorities and terrified citizens. Fishermen, merchants, and travelers vanished without a trace, leaving behind belongings, homes, and families that were never fully explained. Investigators found subtle clues, a footprint here, a mysterious note there, but nothing conclusive. The case lingered for decades, becoming a chilling local legend, yet it never gained international attention. The lack of resolution, the unanswered questions, and the fear that gripped an entire community make this one of the most mysterious forgotten crimes in modern history. Meanwhile, in Central America, during the 1960s, a string of political disappearances revealed a horrifying intersection of crime and corruption. Activists, journalists, and ordinary citizens suddenly vanished, leaving behind only whispers and rumors of government involvement. Investigations were slow, hindered by intimidation, false leads, and bureaucratic obstacles. Families suffered in silence, unsure whether seeking justice would result in further danger. Over time, the events were overshadowed by global political crises, and these crimes faded from memory, despite their profound impact on civil liberties and public trust. Today, only a few historians and investigative journalists recall the details. Yet the cases stand as grim reminders of how power can be abused to commit crimes that remain forgotten. In East Asia during the 1970s, a wealthy industrialist was found dead under mysterious circumstances. At first, authorities claimed it was an accident, but subsequent investigations suggested foul play. Witnesses reported unusual meetings, strange visitors, and evidence of financial manipulation and blackmail. The investigation revealed a network of individuals with motives ranging from personal gain to revenge. Yet the complexity of the case and political sensitivities prevented it from reaching a definitive conclusion. The crime's resolution remained incomplete, and most of the public never learned the full story. This forgotten crime is particularly chilling because it shows how economic ambition and secrecy can combine to create tragedies that remain unsolved for decades. Some crimes are remembered locally, but almost entirely forgotten internationally. In a small town in Eastern Europe during the 1980s, a series of murders targeted elderly residents living alone. The killings were carried out with careful planning, leaving few physical clues and no obvious pattern. Residents were terrified to speak out, and investigators struggled to link the cases. Years later, partial evidence suggested that the perpetrator may have been someone the community trusted, exploiting relationships and local knowledge to avoid detection. The full story never made headlines, and outside of local records, the case is almost entirely unknown. Yet it stands as a chilling example of how calculated evil can, even in North America. Some crimes remain largely forgotten despite their audacity. In the 1950s, a major heist involving a syndicate of criminals targeted multiple cities using advanced techniques for the time. Timed distractions, disguises, and inside knowledge. Millions of dollars were stolen, yet the criminals evaded capture for years. What makes this crime remarkable is not only the planning, but also the systemic failures it exposed. Law enforcement agencies were unprepared for the sophistication of the operation, and bureaucratic miscommunication allowed the perpetrators to remain at large. Over time, the story faded from newspapers and public memory, even though its impact on financial institutions and policing methods was significant. In Africa, a small mining town during the late 20th century became the site of one of the most disturbing forgotten crimes. Laborers began disappearing under mysterious circumstances, and local authorities initially dismissed the cases as accidents. Eventually, evidence pointed to a powerful figure, exploiting the workforce for profit, using intimidation, secrecy, and violence to maintain control. Families lived in fear, and community cohesion deteriorated as mistrust spread. International attention was minimal due to the town's remote location, leaving the crimes largely forgotten. Yet, these events provide a stark reminder of how greed, power, and isolation can combine to create horrors that go unnoticed for years. Even technological and financial crimes can be forgotten, despite their massive impact. In the 1990s, an international cyber fraud operation defrauded thousands across multiple countries, exploiting vulnerabilities in emerging computer networks. The perpetrators moved with astonishing speed and precision, leaving investigators struggling to track them. Some were eventually apprehended, but most of the public never heard of the crimes, and many victims never recovered their losses. This forgotten crime highlights how modern systems can be exploited, and how the scale of a crime does not guarantee public awareness. A recurring theme emerges: unsolved crimes, forgotten crimes, and crimes suppressed by circumstances often share common elements: power, secrecy, fear, and complexity. They remind us that what society chooses to remember is selective, often leaving the most intricate or uncomfortable truths hidden in obscurity. Each forgotten crime teaches us about human behavior, societal structures, and the fragile line between justice and neglect. As we move deeper into the stories, we encounter crimes that span continents, involving betrayal, cunning, and audacity on an international scale. From hidden frauds and political manipulations to cold-blooded serial crimes and disappearances, these cases reveal the shocking lengths humans can go to when driven by greed, fear, or obsession. By the end of this video, you'll see that forgotten crimes are not merely historical curiosities. They are reflections of human nature, cautionary tales about vigilance and morality, and lessons on the consequences of silence. History may forget these crimes, but their impact continues to resonate, shaping societies, laws, and the lives of those affected. And as we explore the next stories, you'll encounter crimes so audacious, manipulative, and dark that you'll be reminded that the line between civilization and chaos is far thinner than we like to imagine. As we reach the final chapter of these forgotten crimes, it becomes clear that many of the darkest deeds in history were not the ones shouted from headlines, but the ones quietly buried, hidden behind walls of fear, greed, and silence. From remote villages to bustling cities, from political halls to shadowy criminal networks, these crimes share a common thread: ordinary people caught in extraordinary circumstances, and extraordinary people whose ambition cruelty, or cunning went unnoticed or unpunished for far too long. One of the most haunting patterns is the role of silence and complicity. Families who didn't speak up, neighbors who looked the other way, officials who ignored warning signs. All these forces allowed crime to grow unchecked. Whether it was a serial predator blending into society, a corrupt official manipulating law and finance, or an entire community exploited through fear and intimidation, the consequences were real and devastating. And yet, the world often forgot, leaving only fragments of stories, whispers in history books, or faded police reports as evidence of what really happened. The human psyche also played a central role in many forgotten crimes. Greed, jealousy, ambition, and the thirst for power drove people to commit acts that defied reason and morality. Some crimes were overt, leaving bodies, stolen treasures, or ruined communities behind. Others were subtle, psychological, and manipulative, leaving scars that were invisible, but no less lasting. By studying these stories, we see how human nature itself can sometimes create tragedy, not through chaos or accident, but through calculated, deliberate choices that exploit weaknesses in society and in people. Yet amid all the darkness, there are lessons. Forgotten crimes remind us to question appearances, to look beyond surface-level explanations, and to remain vigilant against manipulation and injustice. They teach us about resilience, how victims and communities endure, adapt, and sometimes uncover the truth despite fear, oppression, or secrecy. They also teach us about the fragility of memory. History remembers some events vividly, yet others vanish quietly, even when their consequences are enormous. And perhaps the most powerful lesson is this: forgotten crimes are not just about the past. They continue to echo in the present. The systems, societies, and human behaviors that allowed them to happen are still with us today. Corruption, manipulation, and secrecy have not disappeared. They have evolved. By remembering these forgotten crimes, by studying them carefully, we arm ourselves with knowledge, empathy, and caution for the world we live in now. So, as we close this journey through the hidden corners of human history, take a moment to reflect. The crimes we have explored may have been forgotten by the world, but they are not forgotten by the lessons they leave behind. They are mirrors reflecting human ambition, cruelty, resilience, and the fragile balance between justice and silence. Each story, each victim, each cunning perpetrator reminds us that vigilance, awareness, and moral courage are essential, not just to prevent crime, but to remember that behind every statistic is a human life, a family, and a story that deserves to be told. History may try to forget, but as long as we remember, these crimes retain their power to teach, warn, and inspire change. The forgotten crimes of the world are not merely tales of horror. They are enduring lessons about the complexity of humanity, the importance of justice, and the consequences of turning a blind eye. And now, The choice is yours. Will we learn from the past? Or will these stories fade again into obscurity? And with that, the story of forgotten crimes that shook the world comes to a close. The narrative has taken us across continents, decades, and human experiences, revealing crimes forgotten by history, but vivid in their lessons. Every vanished story, every mystery, and every hidden conspiracy has led to one undeniable truth. The shadows of the past shape the world we live in today. Point. Remember, the world may forget these crimes, but the lessons they carry should never be ignored. If this shocked you, watch the next video. More hidden crimes you won't believe actually happened.